All right, let's dive in. Today, we're talking about one of the most wild and complicated times in anyone's life, the teenage years. It's this incredible bridge you have to cross, moving from being a kid who depends on everyone to an adult with real responsibilities. So let's take a closer look at what that journey is really like in the modern world.
It sounds like such a simple question, right? When do you actually become an adult? Is it your 18th birthday, the day you can vote, or is it something else, something you can't quite put your finger on? I mean, the law says one thing, but society might say it's when you're financially independent or start your own family. The thing is, as we're about to see, that finish line, it keeps moving.
So first up, let's talk about all the outside forces that shape who a teenager becomes. And today, you just can't ignore the biggest one out there, the media. It is everywhere and it is powerful.
Think about this for a second. Before a kid even hits young adulthood, they've already seen thousands, literally thousands, of acts of violence through TV, movies, and all over the internet. This makes the media a huge teacher, shaping everything from what's cool to how you see the world. And of course, this constant flood of violent images has become a massive, massive concern.
And if you want to see just how much time we're talking about, well, here are the numbers. This data shows that a whopping 74% of people are watching 2 or more hours of TV every single day. That is a huge window of time for media to make an impression, which naturally leads to a pretty big question.
And here it is, the million-dollar question. Does all this on-screen violence actually make people violent? Now, study after study shows a strong connection, a correlation between watching violence and committing it. But that's not the same as causation. It's the classic chicken or the egg problem. Does violent TV make kids violent? Or are kids who are already prone to violence just drawn to that kind of content? It's a super complex debate with no easy answers.
Okay, so let's shift gears from the outside world and turn inward. The teen years are all about figuring out who you are. It's this intense period of self-discovery, especially when it comes to your identity, your sexuality, and navigating the incredibly complicated world of relationships. A huge piece of this puzzle is understanding sexual orientation. For a long, long time, people saw it as this strict, black and white, either-or thing. But thanks to researchers like Alfred Kinsey, our whole understanding has shifted. We now know it's much more of a spectrum, a continuum, where attraction can land at many different points.
Dating, of course, is a massive part of the teenage experience. But it's about so much more than just romance, right? It's really a training ground for life. It's where you learn about social status, what real intimacy feels like, and just simple companionship, all while trying to figure out who you are next to someone else. But that training ground can have some serious dangers.
And, we have to be real about the darker side of all this exploration. For way too many young people, those first relationships can become a place of fear and abuse. And it's a problem that is so often hidden in silence. Just let that number sink in for a moment. More than 1 out of every 5 high school girls reports being physically or sexually assaulted by someone they were dating. This is not some rare, isolated thing. It's a full-blown crisis happening in our schools every day. And what makes this even more heartbreaking is the silence. Only 1/3 of teenage victims ever tell anyone what's happening. That means 2/3 are suffering completely alone. It just shows how incredibly hard it is to speak up. And unfortunately, that's not the only battle teens can face in silence.
So now we're going to take a wider look at some of these really tough challenges, from things like bullying and antisocial behavior, all the way to abuse happening inside the home. So when we say bullying, what are we actually talking about? Well, it's basically any unwanted, aggressive behavior that's repeated over time and involves a power imbalance. And it's not just physical stuff. As you can see here, it can be verbal, teasing, taunting. It can be social, spreading rumors, leaving people out on purpose. And now, of course, there's cyberbullying, which uses technology to hurt people.
So why don't more people step in when they see something like this happening? Well, there's a psychological reason for it called the bystander effect. The more people there are watching something bad happen, the less likely any single one of them is to help. Everyone just kind of assumes someone else will do something. It's called a diffusion of responsibility.
Now, some disruptive behaviors are more than just typical teenage rebellion. They can actually be diagnosed as disorders. The first is oppositional defiant disorder, or ODD. The key thing to remember here is that this hostility is aimed specifically at authority figures. We're talking parents, teachers, not their friends.
Then there's a more severe condition known as conduct disorder, or CD.
This is a big step up. It involves aggression toward other people and even animals. And what's really significant is a deep lack of empathy. They often see others as threatening and react with aggression they feel is totally justified, and they might show little or no real remorse for it.
When you hear the words child abuse, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For most people, it's physical violence. But the data tells a really different and tragic story. Look at this chart. The most common form of reported abuse, by a huge margin, is neglect. It makes up almost 4 out of every 5 cases. It's this silent crisis that so often goes completely unnoticed.
Okay, this brings us to our final section. After navigating all of these challenges, what does that leap into adulthood actually look like today? Well, it's changed a lot. There's a whole new in-between stage of life that we're only now really starting to understand. It's called emerging adulthood, and it's this period from about 18 to your late 20s where you're not a teenager anymore, but you also haven't taken on all the classic adult roles like a permanent career or marriage. It's a time for intense exploration, mostly centered on figuring out love and work.
So why is this even a thing now? Well, a huge part of the answer is education and economics. 50 years ago, you could graduate high school and get a decent job that could support a family. But today, a college degree is often the bare minimum, even for entry-level jobs, and that just stretches out the whole timeline for becoming financially independent.
But it's so important not to see this longer path as just a delay. It's also a huge opportunity. Jeffrey Arnott, the sociologist who came up with the term, describes it as this amazing time of freedom and possibility. He called it a time of life when many different directions remain possible, when little about the future is decided for certain.
And that really leaves us with one last, really important question to think about. The path to becoming an adult is longer and way more complicated than it's ever been. So as this in-between age becomes the new normal, what do we, as a society, as families, as schools, what do we need to do to better support all the young people who are trying to cross this critical bridge?